to the birth certificate system. The original copy of the birth certificate ends up somewhere else other than the state. Definitely does not end up in the hands of the parents or the person or child that was born. And the name that child was given by his or her parents is translated into dog Latin, an all caps name, which is a fictitious entity that is created that the child then exists as. And unless that child somehow wakes up, that child ends up spending their lives living as a fictitious entity, a second-class citizen, unable to own land, and under the jurisdiction of the evil conspirators that created this whole system. These are all proven facts, and anybody that would like to prove this fact to themselves really won't have to look any further than their own birth certificate and social security number. Channels out there that would like to try and debunk this have nothing more to say than the birth certificate isn't a bond. They have nothing to say as to the facts that we are all enslaved at birth, even their dumbasses. What I've done is put together a list of a few tips, pointers, hints, clues, suggestions, advice, words of wisdom, whatever you want to call it. 12 steps to escape enslavement. Just in case you've gotten as far as making the realization and really don't know how to proceed going forward, these 12 steps might help you on your way to gaining your own freedom. Step number 1, and probably the most important, is to know thyself. Disassociate the flesh and body, man or woman, from the fictitious entity created at birth. This in itself eliminates the spiritual trap that is set by existing as this fictitious entity. The all caps name is not your name. That name was given to you by the entity that created this system, and what is used to stick you with all the liability that that name comes with. No one is willing to answer to that name, then there is no one to stick with the bill. That name is now your entity in commerce or business or straw man, but I think we'll just call it Cappy because straw man is just played out. The second step is to know your place. Assume your rightful position in this world. You are a king or queen. You are a son or daughter of our Creator. No government can tell you what to do. No government can force you to do anything you don't want to do. You are a living man or woman. You rule. Your name is what you say it is. You are who you say you are, and no one can tell you any different. Once you know this and begin to assert it, you will find that things will start to go your way. You, as a living man or woman, have an absolute right to privacy, which was taken from you when you were signed into this commercial-ass system. So it's time to reclaim your right to privacy. It's time to move like this world is yours, because it is. Next, well, you obviously arrived here for a reason. Your curiosity is what led you to searching for the truth, searching for the knowledge that you were left without. It's important that you continue to feed that hunger, also to fuel that fire. Well, basically, you fuel the fire by feeding the hunger. Either way, you need to satisfy your desire and need for more information because there is so much more out there. Just remember to remain open and objective and be ready to change on a dime, because as you're discovering new information, you are going to have to let go of old beliefs and old things that you were taught and indoctrinated to believe in order to embrace what you are now finding is truth. Step 4 is to determine the realistic level of involvement in this whack-ass system that you are going to be forced to have and get comfortable with it, because this system didn't just happen overnight. Just like it changing isn't going to happen just overnight. So there are going to be certain aspects of it that you are going to be forced to deal with. And it's a lot easier on the psyche just to, hunker down and get the job done than it is to piss and moan about having to do something that you have no choice but to do. Step 5 is you're going to want to try to starve the system of what it expects from you, which isn't limited to just tax money. The system has to keep a constant state of chaos in order to keep people worried or scared or angry, which is why the mainstream media does what it does, and which is why there's all kinds of little hidden programming and conditioning in primetime television. It's why there's always a threat from an outside country. It's to keep us all and keep this earth at a lower vibrational state. So if you can not give into the negative vibes that it's looking for, if you are able to somehow cut the amount of money that is being given to them in taxes, if you are able to somehow start living within your means and not, taking out huge loans and huge amounts in credit, refuse to participate in their phony voting, which registering to vote basically admits you're a 14th Amendment citizen and are subject to taxation and the rules, laws of the crooked-ass federal government. And we're already almost halfway there with step 6. Don't waste time and energy trying to wake others or convince others into what you have found as truths. Each individual has their own soul corrections that they need to fulfill. And I know it may be hard to understand, but not everyone is supposed to wake up. Just think of it as like being a member of an exclusive club, or we're the new elites. So be proud. Feel exceptional that you were able to take all this crap apart. You're just that much further along at getting done what you are supposed to be getting done while here. Number 7 is keep in mind that contracts are what got us here. Implied contracts or contracts without full disclosure should be avoided at all costs. A contract is supposed to benefit both parties involved. If the contract can't be modified before signing it, then maybe it shouldn't be signed. Numero 8. Don't waste time trying to learn their pseudo-law, legalese, or chasing any of their paper mazes. Remember, you are above their law, so trying to learn legalese or deal in their arena stoops to their level, thereby allowing you to fall under their jurisdiction. So stay above them, stay outside of their game, and don't get entrapped in any more paperwork like SPC or UCC1 filings that you have no idea what it really does. Number 9, anger, anxiety, fear, worry, and sadness are all lower vibrational emotions and what they want everyone to be in a constant state of. You try and be anything but. The best way we can counter this beast of a system is on the emotional, vibrational level, a level that it cannot counter us with, except for, putting more crap on the news. Another great way to help push positive is to help or connect with others without judgment or condition. Doesn't matter if they're awake or not. Doesn't matter if they're homeless and looking for money and may use the money for drugs. It doesn't matter. It's not for you to judge. Compliments to random strangers, cracking a joke or lightening the mood, hold the door open, help someone reach something from a high shelf, help someone carry the groceries to their car. Anything that I am able to do that makes someone's day seem better is what I usually try and do. Because what usually only takes seconds of my day will stick with someone throughout their entire day. Number 11 should resonate with a lot of you. Decide which financial burden you can do without or get a lesser version of. I think a lot of you may have stumbled upon me looking for some kind of remedy or some kind of solution to, what you owe, your debt. Let me explain to you, there is no debt solution. You are either going to continue to pay monthly, stressing every month when that bill comes due, or you're going to just give up what it is that's causing you so much stress, letting it go, realizing it's just a material object. Credit score is just a number. If they think you owe them, you already know they will not stop calling you, will not stop harassing you until they get what they have coming. It's up to you on how you decide to deal with it. But remember, you are the creditor. You are the living man or woman. The worst they can do is take whatever it is they say you owe on from you, which really ain't much in the grand scheme of things. Finally, number 12, work towards leaving this earth a better place than when you arrived. Like it or not, feel responsible for it or not, we are all responsible for the state of this jacked up world today. And it's going to be up to us all in order to improve it for future generations. So however you interpret that, or whatever actions you need to take in order to follow that, please do. Because if everyone in the world did this, then our world would probably be a whole lot better. Well, if you like what I'm doing here, why don't you go ahead and click that like button. You know you want to like it, subscribe, share, comment, dislike, do something so your brothers and sisters know that you're alive out there. Like putting together a 12-step list for the family so they could see that they are their own captors. You are only enslaved psychologically. You hold the key to your own freedom. Until you find your truth, keep looking.
It's common to see people comment on the actions of the ruling class with phrases like, "How can they be so stupid?" or "Can't they see this is hurting the country?" They say these things because the problems, and often the solutions, seem so obvious that the only thing that makes sense is that the people in power are just a bunch of blithering idiots or short-sighted and greedy, when of course the truth is so much darker than that. Which, by the way, is why they're perfectly happy with you believing that they are all just incompetent or even corrupt. They need you to think that they're basically like you. In fact, if you play your cards right, you could be the next CEO or senator or president. This is the naive perspective that most people have, and it's a perspective that's reinforced with a constant stream of theater and propaganda. Perspective is everything, and when people see things happen in the world, like the actions of the ruling class, they view it through the lens of their own life experiences. This, of course, makes it impossible to have any true understanding of the ruling class because there's nothing in the average person's life experience that resembles even the average day in the life of the people at the top of the hierarchy. For example, with the invasion of the West from Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, it's easy for Western society at large to see and experience firsthand the problems that open borders and multiculturalism are bringing. Powerless citizens of these Western nations think to themselves, this is so easy to see. There are infinite studies and statistics that point to these problems. At the very least, we need to shut down immigration. And if they're afraid to do what's necessary with mass deportations because they're spineless or too prideful to admit their mistake, surely they shouldn't be doubling down on such terrible policies. What kind of delusion is this that is getting in the way of them doing the right thing? And people think this because it's only natural to recall instances in their own lives when they've witnessed similar behavior. And they use that information to try to explain what seems to be the asinine behavior of the ruling class. But this is foolish. Unless they understand that the ruling class is a completely different society, with a completely separate culture, with completely different and to most people alien motives, using examples of behavior you see in your friends and family to construct a model that will explain the behavior of the ruling class is insane. And it'll always result in this idea that they're just a bunch of bumbling morons that don't know what they're doing. It is no different than when primitive, uncontacted tribes in South America see an airplane flying over the rainforest, and they use that exact same strategy to come to the conclusion that what they're seeing is a giant bird monster. The difference between your culture and life experience and that of the ruling class is just as vast a difference as the separation between your culture and that of the primitive humans. It only serves your ego and the interests of the ruling class to think otherwise. No matter how many staged photo ops or performances they put on for the cameras, they are no more regular Joes or even members of your society, then a kid with an ant farm in his bedroom is a member of ant society. What needs to be understood right now is that it's not that they're too stupid or too cowardly to do the right thing. It's that they are doing the right thing. They're just doing it for them, for their family, for their culture, for their society. Society that you're not a member of. You're simply a resource for them, and your happiness is only as important as it correlates with their ability to harvest that resource. An industrial farmer doesn't consider his livestock friends or family. They only care about the feelings of their livestock if it's damaging the product. And these industrial farmers have long ago abandoned any sense of morality or patriotism, and instead have put their energy into maximizing profits and keeping everyone just happy enough to prevent them from panicking and escaping their cages. They are industrial farmers, and you are the livestock. They feel just as emotionally connected to you as a number in a database. If you want a taste of what this is like, play a real-time strategy game. Play a real-time strategy game with expendable armies. Send the armies off to die over and over and over again to protect the kingdom. Do you feel bad for those pixels on the screen? Of course not. At first, you might even enjoy sending the armies on suicide missions just to watch them fight. The only time you begin to feel anxiety about the legions of virtual people being massacred is when the danger starts to get too close and you are actually risking losing your kingdom. This is exactly how the ruling class feels and how they operate. They will send everyone to die, down to the last peasant, to protect their kingdom, and they'll feel just as much connection and compassion for these men and women they rule over as you do for these pixels on the screen. This is the reality that people need to understand before they can understand the behavior of the ruling class. You are not even the same species. So what should you do with this information? Some of you might even be thinking to yourselves, hey, this is a good thing. You need a sophisticated syndicate of sociopaths to run things. You need them to work with robotic precision and not hesitate in a time of crisis. You need them to fight off your enemies without blinking. And that's certainly how the ruling class justifies this gaping, desolate hole that exists inside them, located in the same place you use to store your empathy. Maybe you just think these are the traits necessary to reach the top of the hierarchy, when you know the truth. The truth that, while it's a mistake to think that they're stupid, many of these people, had they been born to your family, instead of being the children of kings, they'd be working the same slave wage cucking jobs that you are. So what do you do with this information? What do you do with this knowledge that they're destroying your culture because they care as much about it as the industrial farmer cares about the culture of his cattle? What do you do with this information that the laws don't apply to them because they were never meant for them in the first place? Just as the barbed wire fences constructed around the farm and the cages that the livestock spend their entire lives in, they're not built for the farmer. They exist only to keep the livestock contained. What do you do, knowing that the farmer will never allow the livestock to call the shots or have self-determination because they would unanimously decide against being slaughtered? What do you do? Well, for starters, you can get angry. For Black Pilled, I'm Devin Stack. If you like my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you share. If you want to pick up a copy of my book, Day of the Rope, it hasn't been banned yet. Link is in the description. You can also send me crypto to the addresses below or become a patron at patreon.com/blackpilled.
Howdy, Larkin Rose here. I'm feeling slightly less than entirely patient and polite today, so if this video gets slightly caustic, too bad. This video is for all the people who are constantly saying, well, if not for government, we couldn't have roads, or we couldn't have police, or nobody would care for the poor, or we wouldn't be protected, whether it's from local thugs or from foreign invaders. We wouldn't have this, we wouldn't have that. So thank goodness we have government and taxes, because we wouldn't have any of those things. And the first way I'd respond to that is by pointing out the assumptions that underlie that complaint, that argument. Basically what people are saying, because let's be clear about what the terms mean, government is the people who boss everybody else around. And taxes are those people demanding money from us. So they basically tell us, hand over a whole bunch of money and we'll decide how to take care of you. We'll decide how to spend your money. If we don't like it, too bad, we don't really have a choice. Like, well, you can vote in a few years and maybe something will change, even though it totally won't. So that's what people are saying. Basically, if we didn't have a ruling class stealing our money and then supposedly spending it to protect us, how could we possibly have roads or anybody to protect us? The implication is that in this country, for example, 300 million people would just sit around thinking, oh, we can't do it. Without politicians and tax collectors, we can't have a road, we can't protect each other, and we can't... And it rests on this bizarre assumption that things that almost everybody wants, they wouldn't do anything to make happen unless there were politicians forcing us to give them money so they can make it happen. And so an example I like to use is, let's apply the same argument to food, because food is pretty darn important. I think everybody can agree. Let's apply the same argument that statists use about the roads or caring for the poor or protection or anything like that. The argument would go like this. Now, in the context of food, listen how idiotic this is. If we don't have government demanding money from all of us under the threat of caging us, and that's what taxation is, here's the money you have to give us, here's the nasty things we do to you if you don't. If that didn't happen so that they could build a big food production and distribution system and feed us, well, we'd all starve. We'd all just sit around saying, gosh, I wish we had food, but, no politicians and tax collectors. We're just going to sit around and starve to death. Now, in this country, nobody would believe something that stupid, because all you have to do is go to a supermarket and see a perfect example of really efficient, organized cooperation that nobody is forced to do. There is no, if you're going to make the argument that people make about roads and protection and all that, you'd say, well, nobody is forced to make any food for anybody in this country. How do you know everyone's just going to say, well, it's not my job? Then we'll all starve to death. There's no guarantee. There's no master plan guaranteeing that we'll all have food. So obviously we're all going to starve if we don't have an authoritarian government stealing our money and then making food and giving it to us. Because golly gee, we couldn't possibly do it voluntarily ourselves. Again, in this country, nobody makes that argument because they see it happening voluntarily. Nobody involved is forced to do that. Nobody is forced to make you a single bite of food. There is no guarantee at all from anybody. And yet, Americans are, by and large, hugely overweight. Obviously, we don't have a lack of food. We have a lack of healthy food. But obviously, we see that example, oh, we can handle that. Voluntarily, mutual cooperation, that's fine for food, but for some reason, it's not okay, and we can't even fathom the idea of the exact same thing handling roads, or handling protecting us, or other things that almost everybody wants. So in the question is this bizarre assumption that everybody will sit around really, really, really wanting something, but because there aren't politicians bossing us around and stealing our money, well, how can we possibly do it? And one of the most common things is, who will build the roads? Which is amazingly stupid to me. Just amazingly stupid. I have here in my pocket a little tiny thing. With this little tiny thing, I can be most places in this country and call people all over the world. And I own it myself. I'm not anywhere near rich these days, but I own one. Almost everybody I know has one of these. A little thing that can fit in your pocket, and just on a whim, you can open it and talk to somebody who's on the other side of the planet. And there was no coercion. Nobody forced anybody to make one of these. This is the result of voluntary cooperation. And that's it. Free trade. Organization, yeah, good. Cooperation, yeah, good. Coercion, which is what government is, and taxation, which is theft, didn't need that to do this. So what these people are telling me, oh, we wouldn't have roads if we didn't have government, is that somehow free individuals, relatively free, interacting voluntarily can make it so I can talk to almost anybody in the world on a little thing that fits in my pocket on a budget that is not a very good budget at the moment, but I still have one of these. That freedom, not authoritarianism, can supply me with this, but freedom cannot achieve a flat place. Because that's what a road is. It's a flat place. From here to there, because we have these machines that take us from here to there. By the way, we don't have those machines because of government. We have those machines because of free enterprise and voluntary interaction and cooperation. The idea that freedom can make a car but can't make a flat place is just idiotic. You really think we can't make a flat place? And so I ask people, and they say, well, we'll build roads. Are you really telling me that you really and truly think that if government fell off the face of the earth, 300 million people in this country, 7 billion if we want to include the whole planet, would sit around in their houses thinking, golly, I wish I could go visit Fred, but I can't because there's not a flat thing from me to him, and I don't know how to do it. And the other 300 million or 7 billion people, we can't possibly do it because there aren't any politicians and tax collectors. If they were here, we could do it. If they were here to boss us around and steal our money and really inefficiently build a flat place, then we'd be set. Then I'd be comfortable and I could be confident that I could get places. I could visit Fred. I could go shopping. But now we're all going to sit in our houses wishing we could go to the corner store, but we can't because, golly, how could we possibly make a flat place from here to there? We can make these where you can talk to anybody in the world. We can make machines that you drive around in, but no, we couldn't possibly make a flat place. And when people say, well, who will build the roads? The first answer is the same damn people who do it now. Politicians and tax collectors don't build the friggin' roads. Have you ever seen one out there? No, you haven't. They steal our money, waste most of it, do all their corrupt games, and then they pay other people. Here's an idea. How about if we pay those other people who actually build the stinking road? And the fact that that doesn't occur to people is a great indication of how well indoctrinated people are by the rulers who will perpetually tell us, you can't organize anything, you can't achieve anything, you can't do anything unless we are here to force it on you. And it's, again, there are a zillion examples, whether it's caring for the poor or protection or roads, obviously, where most of the population will say, I'm really concerned that poor people won't be taken care of, which means most of the population wants people in need to be taken care of. And if we didn't have politicians stealing our money, how would it happen? Here's an idea. Take some money out of your pocket and give it to one of the people that you think needs help. Why would you not comprehend that, but you would comprehend some guy 1,000 miles away passing a law to send an armed thug to take your money, to waste 90% of it, and then give a little bit to somebody who may just be defrauding the system or may actually need it? And the amount of indoctrination required to make people even ask these questions of how could we possibly do this without government? What do you think government adds to the equation? It doesn't add any resources. It doesn't create anything. Everything it gives away, it steals from us first, by way of taxation. It doesn't add any skills. It doesn't add any knowledge. The people who are here would still be here if the institution of government fell over. We have all the know-how, we have all the resources, all the technology. The only thing it adds is one group that's imagined to have the right to violently assault and control and extort everybody else. So what the question really means is, how can we have a road, or how could I help that poor, or how could that poor person be helped, or how would anybody protect us if there wasn't a gang of thugs with permission to violently control and rob us? And when you recognize that that is literally what the question means, you already see how utterly idiotic it is. And it's completely the result of authoritarian statist indoctrination. Nobody would come up with that on their own. And you obviously don't see that with the example of food or cars or cell phones or anything else. Nobody says, we won't be able to talk to each other unless there's a gang of thugs that's allowed to boss us around and steal our money. And just economically, how stupid you have to be to think that's a good idea. Here are your choices. Let's do this. I'll give you these two choices for how you will be fed from now on. Either you can go spend your own money wherever you want. You can go to the supermarket or the local this or the local grocery, whatever you want. You can go decide what you want, and they'll tell you the price. You decide what you're going to buy and how much. And you can go to different places, and you can shop around, and you can do all that. That's option number one. But let me warn you, option number one does not give any guarantee that you will be fed. There's no master plan forcing people to feed you. So, oh my gosh, you better be really scared of that option, despite the fact that you can do it day after day, and it works really darn well and feeds pretty much not only this country, but with a massive surplus. So that's option number one that apparently statists are scared of. Option number two is politicians will take as much money of yours as they decide to take. Then they will decide what, if anything, they will buy with that money in terms of food to give to you, to feed you. Do you really think that will serve you better, that will feed you better? Yeah, I'm much more comfortable that I'll have I'll be fed, I'll be secure, everything will be okay if a gang of thugs who doesn't really care about me steals my money and then decides what, if anything, to give me back from what they stole. But that is implied in the question, whatever you put in the blank. How are we going to have blank if not for government? What you're saying is, how can we, the people who really want roads and food and cell phones and protection and all the things that almost everybody wants, how can we possibly have that unless we give someone permission to steal our money and boss us around and then decide what they're going to give us? And the same thing applies no matter what you put in the blank. How will we possibly do blank without government? One of the silly ones is caring for the poor. How will we care for the poor? Think of what that means. Like when more than half the country votes for a party to take care of the poor, it's more than half of the country saying, we're really concerned and we want to make sure that the less fortunate are taken care of, but we don't believe that normal people acting in freedom will take care of them. Well, if the people didn't care about the poor, they wouldn't win the election. By definition, if you vote for a welfare state, you're an idiot. Because either people are heartless bastards and you're going to lose, or people are compassionate and giving and you don't need to win. Just give them your stinking money. But people play the game, and that's the Democratic Party lives off of the idiotic notion that you're all so heartless that you should vote for us to steal your money to give to the poor. And half the country falls for it. Yeah, we're all so heartless that we voted you into office for the specific purpose of taking our money to help the less fortunate. That's just freaking brilliant. How about if half the country just gave their stinking money to the less fortunate? And then the less fortunate would all be rich, because it would be 1 trillion times more efficient than the government version of welfare ever is. Also, it would be actual charity instead of mass theft and corruption and fraud and all that fun stuff. But what takes the cake, the ultimately insane thing, whatever you put in that gap, how can we have blank without a parasitic ruling class and a bunch of hired thieves? It's just a stupid question, but it's extra super stupid when what's in the blank is, how will we be protected? Who will protect us from thieves and robbers if we don't have government? It's the most idiotic question. It's also the most frequent question from statists. So here's what the question literally means. If we don't give a certain gang of people permission to violently control us and take our money under threat of putting us in a cage, who will protect us from people who might commit aggression against us and take our money. Wanting government for that is exactly as brilliant as saying, we have to have a carjacker in our town, otherwise somebody might steal our cars. Government is an appointed thief. If you don't think taxation is theft, first of all, you're a really well-trained slave. Second of all, try not paying, see what happens. See if they say, oh, that's quite all right. Or if they say, no, you're going to pay, or we're going to take your stuff, or eventually we'll put you in a cage. And when people say, that's not theft, because we get something back. Learn to think. And I use this example all the time, and all I ever get is stupid looks from statists in response. If I robbed you at gunpoint of $100, and the next day I gave you a sandwich, and you said, what? I said, hey, now everything's fine. Because you benefited. I gave you a service. I gave you lunch, so that retroactively makes it okay that I robbed you at gunpoint. Would you buy that argument? No, you'd say, that doesn't make it okay. Okay, you gave me a sandwich. And yet every statist makes the exact same argument when it comes to government. Well, we get some stuff for it after they demand our money under threat of violence and putting us in a cage. Then we get services or goods. We don't get what we asked for, and we get lots of things we didn't ask for. But we kind of get something, and that retroactively makes it okay for them to say, give us this much of every paycheck you make, or we're sending men with guns to take your property. And the slaves justify their own enslavement. I'm proud to pay my taxes. I'm proud to get robbed by a parasitic ruling class and get a little bit back and feel good about it. Like, not only is that legitimate and justified, but I feel proud that I let myself get robbed by a bunch of crooks and parasites. But again, the ultimate thing is protection. When people say, who will protect us from aggressors and thugs and thieves if we don't have a government? Even though what government is, by its very nature, is a gang of aggressors and thugs and thieves. They issue commands. Every law they pass is a command backed by a threat of violence. You have to do this. You're not allowed to do that. Here are the nasty things we will do to you if you get caught disobeying. I mean, everybody knows that, even though they don't usually say it in terms that blunt and honest and accurate. But to say we need taxes to be protected is as stupid as you can get. It's saying we need theft to avoid theft. And the fact that people are trained to use different words so that this theft sounds okay. It's legalized. It's taxation. And we voted for the people who robbed us. Like, we got to elect our local carjacker, and that means he represents us when he demands our car and points a gun in our face. He's serving us as he steals our car because he's going to use that car and sell it and make money to make sure nobody else steals our car. That is the essence of government. And the fact that you have hundreds of millions of victims of that scam vehemently defending it and saying, I'm not going to give that up. I don't want to give up government. Who would protect us? I don't want to give up the biggest aggressor on the planet, the biggest thief on the planet. Look at your tax bill and see how much private crooks steal from you. So before you ask that question, before you ask, how could we possibly have roads or protection or water or air or Christmas or Santa Claus or any of the zillion things that statists imagine we can't possibly have without a ruling class, think about what the question actually means. Because when you get to the point where you understand the implications of your own question, asking, how can we possibly have this without a parasitic gang of thugs robbing us? When you actually understand what you're really asking, you won't ask the question because you will realize it's completely freaking idiotic.
USSA. Every step we take towards making the state our caretaker of our lives, by that much we move towards making the state our master. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Karl Marx created 10 steps in the Communist Manifesto necessary to destroy free markets and constitutional republics, to each according to his needs, from each according to his ability. This is the foundation of slavery. Marx hated the bourgeoisie, the middle class, and called them the gross merchants of exploitation. Let's see how gradualism of the elite has transformed and perverted our American free market constitutional republic. Number 1 of the Communist Manifesto, the abolition of private property and the application of all rents of land to public purposes. This is now in our society as property taxes, zoning laws, Bureau of Land Management, environmental regulations, building permits and inspections, eminent domain abuse. Number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. We know this income tax came about in 1913, and it was originally intended only to be used to tax the top 0.5% of the population, and now we're all touched by it. On the federal level, the state, the county, and sometimes even city income tax. There's a Social Security tax that's thrown on top of it, various millionaire or luxury taxes. Basically, the harder we work, the more we pay. This acts as an elimination of threats to the elite. The elite do not pay these taxes because they use tax-free foundations to hold their wealth, to which they control. But the average citizen does not have access to those benefits. They write the laws to benefit themselves. Number 3, the abolition of all rights of inheritance. I paid taxes all my life and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. And then the estate tax comes by and says, give me the t-shirt. Estate taxes. Number 4 is the confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels. Government seizures, tax liens, IRS confiscation of property without due process. They can literally go into your bank account and take your money without even warning you. Assets forfeiture laws. Right now they're used on terrorists, but is it really a stretch of the imagination to think that one day they're going to use it on quote-unquote patriots? Number 5 of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. The Federal Reserve is a private-owned bank, but that, again, serves the elite's interests. They get to issue fiat currency, and they practice and maintain fractional reserve banking. These are the main tools of control, because if you can control the currency, you can control the nation. Number 6, centralization of the means of communication and transportation in the hands of the state. The Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, mandated driver's license, various traffic and transportation laws. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with the common plan. This is more or less known as the Department of the Interior, the Department of Commerce and Labor, the EPA, Bureau of Land Management, and the National Park Service, Department of Energy. Number 8, equal liability of all labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. We have the minimum wage, affirmative action, government work projects, and turning a blind eye to illegal immigrants that corporations use to lower their costs and drive out legal workers and drive down wages for all other citizens. And then on top of it, the elites move the productive capacity to slave labor countries where they don't face any of the laws and regulations that we have here to protect workers and the environment. Destroying the economy by enslaving a population with debt and driving down wages as the job situation becomes worse. That's what we're going through right now. Number 9, a combination of agricultural and manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by more equitable distribution of population over the country. Our food industry is a corporate giant. Food Inc. is a great documentary kind of bringing light to this subject that definitely deserves our interest. The lowering of quality of food hurts our health, and Americans have also lost the ability to feed themselves. At the turn of the last century, something like 85% of the population lived close to farmland and were involved in that. And then as our society became more industrialized, we've moved more towards cities and more dependent on the centralized food system. And then to get back to the number 9 here, China has forced relocation programs. Basically, when they want to move populations, they send their armies in to basically move entire populations to where the government wants it without any care or ability to pay back these people for the land that they have lost. And number 10, and perhaps the most important one, because without this one, none of these others would work. Free education for all children in public schools. The abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, and the combination of education with industrial production. Basically, the public education system's there to indoctrinate the children into worshiping the state, more or less, and train the children to work for the system and not against the system. They want people to not think outside the box and memorize certain things the state deems necessary for their needs. But nowhere along the line is entrepreneurialism taught. So here's this video I'm sure you've seen of the kids, young kids being indoctrinated with Obama. And I don't care if it's Obama or Bush, this is not the role of our schools.
He said we must take the same to make sure everyone gets bureaucracy and Obama. He said red, yellow, black, or white, all are equal in this site. Bureaucracy and Obama. Yes, bureaucracy.
Okay, now everybody, let's sing it together on the count of three. All right. I like that. 1, 2, 3.
Bureaucracy and Obama. He said we all must live in it to make this country strong again. Bureaucracy and Obama. He said it all must be fair today. Equal work is equal pay.
By the time they're 7, I can turn them to anything that I want them to. And that's the idea of the public school system. They want you to get them into child daycare and nursery schools, sometimes even at 4 months old. Get them away from the family, get them away from people who actually care about them, and get them into the hands of people who do not necessarily have the best interests of kids in their mind. And trust me, I'm a friend with a lot of teachers, and this is a very touchy topic. But at the end of the day, teachers don't have a say what goes on in their classroom. They don't have a say in the curriculum that's taught. And quite honestly, the teachers' union, the fact that it's a union, it's a centralized, powerful organization, and that's not how schools used to be, and that's not what made this country great. Our school system used to be privately funded, and families used to get together and build schoolhouses and have whoever was best fit to teach the kids to teach it. But the school system we have now, the way it's set up, it's just atrocious, and our grades show it. And I'm certainly going to go into the subjects. I'm very passionate about it. Essentially, public education is public indoctrination. They train our kids to love their slavery, and they suppress children who rebel. There's always those kids that are antsy, and I certainly was one of them. I would doodle on everything, and I like to talk and stuff, and thank God I wasn't brought up in an era where I could have been strung out on Ritalin. To see all these kids strung out on psychotropic drugs at such a young age, when it's their natural abilities that are coming out, and to suppress that at such a young age destroys the passion that's built into these kids. And it also encourages the average student to take on debt to further their education, to ensure better jobs. We encourage them not to have the entrepreneurial spirit and work for the government. I can't tell you how many brilliant people I've seen go through college, and they go to the teaching programs, and they have the ability to go out and start jobs and create jobs, but they end up getting looped into the system at an early age, and once you're in, you're in. And it's tough making a life change like that. And I think one of the most scariest things is with our education system, they purposely omit the most important lessons, like the stuff that I'm covering in the Sons of Liberty. There would be no need for this if we taught education, if we taught monetary policy. Don't you find it ironic that 4th and 5th grade we're teaching kids about drugs and sex education instead of probably the most important thing to guaranteeing somebody's success in life is understanding money and balancing a checkbook. We'll spend billions of dollars making videos and spending time teaching kids not how to do drugs and sex when all that does is actually get them interested in those subjects. There's no need to teach them at that young age. Basically, the whole point of the Communist Manifesto is the elimination of property rights, dissolution of the family union, and destruction of the opiate of the people, which is religion. And that's Karl Marx's quote. Those 3 things were the backbone of free society. People who had the ability to take care of their own property, keep the fruits of their labor. A strong family produced healthy, mentally stable people who did not need to rely on the government. And then the religion taught people that when they're in trouble to look towards a higher purpose, or not complain about their way that they were, and muscle through instead of looking for the government to help them out. Open your eyes and stop supporting a system that's working towards your slavery. Opt out.
Down. So that's standard stuff. They'll never prove anything or accept anything if they have to pay out on it. Because we live in such a fair society, we're constantly told. But these miners, they play around during the day with themselves, each other, they chat away there, they sit in little groups, and you'd meet them in town crossroads, basically, corners and things like that, favourite spots. And they would chat. And what was amazing, if you're a youngster listening to that, them chatting, these guys who left school about 10 or 11 years of age were way, I use the term smarter, way smarter than we are today. Because they understood the importance of the system which governed and ruled them and the techniques that it used. They knew the different owners of newspapers, their names, what their agendas were, etc., via their papers. Today, people seem to think, like Brzezinski said they would, because they're trained to do so from the 70s and so on. Brzezinski said that people will eventually be unable to think for themselves. All they'll be able to do is to repeat the news that they get the previous night or previous day. And that truly is here today. There's hardly a question asked about who owns the papers. There's hardly a question asked like what organizations the editors and owners belong to. And even the top shareholders. What are their views and opinions? What clubs do they belong to? The miners used to know these things because it's awfully important, as they knew, to understand. They knew because they were perfectly aware that all your opinions and information they were allowed to have was given to you via the media of the day. I've read over the years on the air, in fact, of countless articles on this information age and the constant surveys that they've done to show that the more data they give us, the more confused we become. 99% of the data is rubbish. It always has been rubbish. It won't change or affect anything. Most data is trivia. And it literally is bubblegum for a few seconds of your mind or your time of the day. And nothing will come out of it for you, except you're wasting your life and being distracted and titillated generally, because most of it today is entertainment or it's about stars and stuff like that. Really. And we live in an age where everyone's taught that you're a star if you put all your data up on Facebook, and you can become a star, just like the reality shows and so on. And of course, monkey see, monkey do, and everyone emulates what they think they should be doing, just like the reality shows, mainly for the young, of course. It's rather amazing to see how simple and easy it is to control so many people. It's rather frightening in a sense, isn't it? But don't forget they've had lots of experience in managing populations down through the ages, long before even Machiavelli wrote The Prince. The knowledge of governing people and managing people is always accumulated for centuries and centuries. It's never discarded and tossed out. Nothing can become obsolete when it comes to successful techniques of controlling the minds of people and their time as well. Because if you control their time, then if they're chattering about irrelevant things, they're not going to be fomenting revolution or nasty comments about you. And that's how the rulers pretty well see it. We live in an incredible age, though, today. And TV was bad enough. It was just too easy to have people give up a good chunk of their life watching television. A good chunk. And so much advertising, of course, in between as well. Voluntary watching, something like 40 minutes of advertising a night when you add it all up. That's quite something, isn't it? Just to get a little bit of a laugh here and there, or whoever it happened to be, over a few hours. That was also mentioned in a pretty good movie as far as exposing that in it, called The Looker, an old movie. It's quite interesting too, of what they understood even then. You get little bits of what is common knowledge in the advertising industry and the behavioural studies stuck into movies. But we are truly entertained to death. And with entertainment comes an awful lot of indoctrination. Do you really think we're so obsessed right now? And we should be so obsessed right now, across the board in every country at the same time, with this transgenders, equality and all the rest, and all this mixing, blah, blah, blah. Is that the most important thing that's going on? Is it? Why is it across the board? It's because it's a fantastic distraction from giving you any hard news that's going to affect everybody, in so many ways, economics, etc., or war, or whatever it happens to be. And at the same time, too, it helps to create a generation, a growing generation, because they're really going for the children now to indoctrinate them into utter confusion at a very early age, which ties in perfectly well towards the non-breeding program. That's why it's getting pushed. As far back as the 50s, you can get documentation from Eugenics Society talking about ways of reducing the population, and they said they would push all kinds of substitutes and homosexuality, etc. Any program where people didn't breed. And right down to, possibly down the future, doing this kind of tampering with the appearance of genders, etc. And that's why it's getting so drastically pushed across the whole planet, remember. It's not just in one country or another. Do you really think that's the most important thing? And you realise, too, that all the different pushes down through the last century or so for rights for people were basic rights that affected everyone, like money, wages, cost of living, housing, healthcare, that kind of stuff. At least reasonable healthcare, and so on and so on and so on. These were hard slogs and struggles, and they're not over yet. They're not over yet. And the cost of living, as you know, has gone through the roof with inflation, because the currencies are worth nothing since 2007 or 8 when they crashed economies and plundered us all via the banking system again. But you don't hear about it, do you? Everything is drowned out, apparently, because everyone is just fascinated with all the different gender, this and gender that. It's astonishing. But when you see an agenda going across the whole planet at the same time, believe you me, these are massive, international, old institutions that are pushing all of it. All of it. And I'll go into part 2 of this, perhaps, if I can get around to it. It's amazing how you can go off in 1,000 different pathways in a talk, all to do with the same thing, really. Because it is so well documented. And at the same time, as I've said, we've got so much information at our fingertips. Most folk don't want to know. Most folk want to live in the happy, comfy cotton wool thing. Let's just be happy today. Happy. Don't give me bad news. I might spoil my day. It's kind of like the Romans, They always say that Rome was being attacked by different bands that were attacking them from outside. And eventually, they did break through the walls, outer walls and so on, and the people inside, in the big palaces, etc., the nobility, were having a party. They couldn't believe it, they were having parties. They couldn't believe that they were actually getting conquered. It was unthinkable to them. And that's what we have today, isn't it? In so many ways, if you want to look around you. So many things that really are happening. But all you get is distraction. distraction. Very emotive topics, mind you, at the same time. And emotion is a great way to stop you from thinking critically. We also have different articles coming out too that make you think, because again, there are big agendas at play. Before they even had all the wars across the Middle East, they had various articles in military circles to do with the fallout from all the blowback, as they call it, if they were ever to go and attack all those countries. I rewatched the old movie called 3 Days of the Condor, and in the plot they actually have the Middle East and oil wars run as a game. What would happen if they ever had to do this, supposedly? Right down to having to do it possibly one day, because the public would immediately be all for wars if they ran out of gasoline, for instance. And they'd be so angry they would overthrow governments if the whole system came to a stop. So they're always doing the games, but they also have professions. We have hundreds and hundreds of professions involved in each little game. The different departments of psychological and physical warfare, all different forces and forces. And social workers and social systems, what we can do with the fallout, the blowback, and the migrants, and the refugees, etc., etc. It's all done, it's all worked out, we know that. So they had these talks in the 50s, and 60s, and 70s, and 80s. Nothing happens spontaneously, nothing at all. And the oddest thing from the controller's point of view, from our point of view, when we look at the controllers, is to see how different their tactics are. We see it from the bottom, how it will affect you, how it will affect your community, your area or your country, your cost of living for the wars, and for the differences with how you're going to even cope with the migrants, with the incredible cost of that, for instance. Because to take it off your tax money, that increased taxes dramatically, or basically cut back elsewhere on programs that you or your parents or grandparents fought hard to get in the first place. But the ones at the top never see it the same way at all. In fact, it's irrelevant what you're thinking, because they have different agendas to get to their points and to their goals, etc. Remember, the goal is always a world government. In military academies, the top military academies in the West, every officer is told that the only way to peace is for the cessation of war. And the cessation of war can only come through peace when everyone is peaceful. Therefore, they have to fight wars to get to the stage where everyone's at peace, and it can only come again through a world governmental system. And personally, how I see it is that that's the elite talking down to the officer class, because the elite are still like that with all their high CIA types and neuroscientists and behaviorists way above it all. Looking at this globe, this ball, this call it what you want. I know there's a lot of flat earthers out there as well, but the fact is, look at the place, the third drop from the sun, right? And that's how they see it. They don't see it as this little country and that little country, at least as far as where they want to take it to. It's theirs, it's their planet, they're going to control it, and they're getting it all to go to a particular direction and achieve a lot of goals at the same time, right down to depopulation, and to get more and more folk who are not going to breed. And this is very real, it's very, very real. And at the same time, even right down to all the different substitutes for man and woman, male and female. That they're going the whole hog, you see, as long as they don't have children. People have no idea of the amount of the tax money that was thrown at getting the contraception through in the first place, getting it made, etc. And the big eugenic societies that are part of the governing system, because in Britain, in London, for instance, and don't forget it's a British Empire, the governing system is way above any political party or parliamentary system. It's way above that, always has been. And last week I touched on Julian Huxley, for instance, who was one of the founding members of a few agencies, and one of them was very, very secret, because he believed, along with H.G. Wells and many other people, who all belonged to the same organizations, by the way, they believed that a really intellectual, professional elite should be managing society. And that would never happen by voting politicians in. They knew too that then it would be seen as a totalitarian system if you got rid of the politicians and simply ruled in a fashion kind of like the Soviet system or even China. So the people would rebel against that, because in the West they were more individualistic, they were not a collective type society. Therefore they gave you the pretense, the one you still see, of politics. Well, above all that, you have professionals ruling everything. Do you really honestly believe? And again, I always use the British system as this more obvious, in a sense. They call it musical chairs with the politicians. The party gets into office, they delegate different politicians to be the head of different departments, either finances, the military, the National Health Service, or something like that. And once in a while, when there's a scandal or whatever, or things just don't go too well, rotate them around. So you're in charge of, say, the economics of the system one day, and you have been for a few weeks, and then suddenly you're now in charge of healthcare. Of course it cannot be done. You see, the permanent civil service, they happen to be the ones who are really running the country. They hand the cards and the scorecards and the dummy cards to read for the politicians and so on. They work it all out in advance and write the speeches, because they're the only ones who know what's going on. And they themselves take their orders from a much higher organisation. And so Julian Huxley advocated early on, very early on in his career, that the professional organisations would be kept secret, and they would know each other across the world, and they would shape and guide society generation by generation by very secretive clubs or institutions. You know, for instance, the big foundations is a part of it, and the foundations, the tax-free foundations under the guise of philanthropy, have been funding what it always appeared to be left-wing, even communistic organisations for most of the 20th century into this century. And Norman Dodd talked about that with the Rees Commission, which was set up in the US, and when the Senate wanted to investigate why these big foundations were running all these NGOs, funding them all incredibly with all the money they're just, I mean, multi-billions today actually have at their disposal, with impunity. I mean, meddling in every government's affairs by starting this and starting that and getting protests going in organisation, etc. All the things that the communists were blamed for. And they can get away with it. Well, why do you think they can get away with it? Because you see, they're part of a system, not the complete part, but they're a part of a system, which is an international governing body, a real governing body. They decide what will be taught through universities, etc. They decide what NGOs, and these are armies of NGOs that can lobby and lobby and lobby, etc. Locally, they'll lobby locally and federally and etc. And even internationally for what they want. You can't compete with that kind of lobbying power to get your point of view across. Because the NGOs are simply that. They don't dream up the name of their NGO, or even to have one. The big foundations have massive, almost civil servants actually. Some of them bigger than some countries across the world. And they decide what they're going to create. And they find the people, they train them, the top ones. They have full pensions and everything, these top NGO leaders. Great salaries like CEOs. And even some of them even have the big high-rise buildings for their offices. But the rest of the public don't know, because they don't get that mentioned much at all, if at all, in the news. All they get is what politicians are saying and stuff like that. That's what they get. It's quite an easy technique to use upon the public to make sure that they're not being involved in what's really, really going on. It makes it much easier to govern the world, doesn't it? Never mind nations. Everyone right now is arguing about the latest reality show. That's their topics. They're arguing about who's had sex with who and the stars, etc. What do you mean stars? They're just actors and actresses. But that's what you're given. And again, all the transgenders, that's all you're getting now, you know. Plus, of course, there's articles out now where people who really belong to these different groups, that they've joined them thinking it's for them, that they've been purposely been created for them to join, then they're told to promote the next part of the agenda. When you've read their articles and their agendas from their own foundations, etc., and their groups, they have strategies and they're given implementation periods. Some of them are 5-year plans, some are 10-year plans for the next part and the next part and the next part. So it's quite amazing to watch it really unfold the way that you've already read it, and they're pretty well on target. And it's true, when it ticks over to the next particular year, they're immediately going in for the next part. They've won this, they've won that, and won this, so here's the next part they want to win. And I remember too, talking about 2000 to 2001, when they had the meetings for censorship committees and human decency committees and all this kind of stuff. In other words, ones that were safeguarding the public, supposedly, entertainment, they met. And like everything else, their job was to find out if they can push the envelope to the next step. And back then, they were talking about it had more gay sex, etc. on television that was coming. And now the next step was for pushing intergenerational sex and even bestiality, in fact. So if you think it's all over, it's not. And don't think that people you're seeing parade in the streets, most of them with big banners and that, all for it, don't think that they're the guys that plan it. They're not. And it is amazing to watch it all happen. And as I've mentioned before, if you can't protect your children, I don't care what guise it goes under, the greatest guys, like lawyers, what we call law is a strange kind of law. It's kind of foreign, I think, to a lot of people, because it seems to have nothing to do with right and wrong. Really, it's all to do with wording and letters, and let's explore the meaning of this word, and blah, 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 blah. And there's the same ones actually who are working for the foundations, where they'll take a law and they'll reinterpret it to try to basically neutralize the meaning of the law, if it's meant to protect anything that they're targeted, etc. That's how it's really done. So rather than protect children, you simply give children the right to consent to have sex with adults. See how it's done? You see how it's done? That little mind bend, and most folk kind of like, oh well, you know, maybe that would change the opinion of all of you. So it confuses most folk, and they just go along with it. So it's very clever, isn't it? It's very clever. Rather than just enforce the law and protect the children. Children have the right, really the right, to live in a little happy world of whatever fantasy they're watching, or superheroes, or whatever they're into. They have the right to do that for a few years in their life before they're tossed into a world of uncertainty, lies, deception, and we have to run and run and run to make enough money and compete with everybody else in a rather brutal system. At least even with their childhood, we don't have to start worrying about what adult or anybody wants to have sex with them. I personally think it's rather strange when often the same groups are going after, for instance, Catholic priests with accusations, and at the same time they're promoting, at the same time, the children have the right to have sex with adults. Don't you think it's rather weird? And it's interesting too to see how the different arguments happen to be worded, because, again, word is awfully important, isn't it? How it's worded. is a push for consent for children by teaching them how to give or deny consent. Articles are out there too, being taught in the universities to students in universities of what they, for the next generation of people who push the agendas or even teach the agendas. And they say that parents are outdated and obsolete, basically, as their opinions, etc. What's true is that when you hand cell phones and give the internet to young children, they're definitely going to be heavily involved very quickly, and promoted too, because it is promoted all across the internet. To be fascinated by sex until you end up with a hypersexualized society long before they even hit puberty. There have been so many articles now. I remember doing articles years ago on studies that had been done on this at the time. And so all they do is hypersexualize children, which again ensures that they'll try everything. They want more children themselves. At the same time, they generally won't stick with one partner for very long. That's the intention of it too. If you're going to have children, unless you're going to have big money from the state, which of course the state has tried before, then you need another partner to help support the child and bring them up, especially in today's economies. And the economies aren't going to get any better for most people who actually do real physical or real practical or essential work. And so, if you don't get a permanent partner, they'll either abort children or they won't want children, but it doesn't matter. Women want children, they want them, and they won't bond with a partner to enable it to happen. It all works together, and this was all discussed by eugenic societies on how to train populations as far back as the 1920s and 30s. And also we're well into the agenda of basically aborting anything which they claim could be a defective fetus of some kind, physically or any other way too. And it's done without question by the populace when they're told that. Now, as I said before, we're killing off other people, older folk, because they're not productive anymore. It's not cost effective. It's cost effective if they've got years in them to still work and pay into the system and buy things, consume and produce. But as the UN said, a good citizen of the globe, a global citizen, is a good producer and consumer. So you offer them a euthanasia pill instead. And now we have younger people being offered it when all they need really is some occasional home care. But that's got to cost money as well. It's much cheaper to give them the pill, isn't it? And bang, that's it. And society will accept it because they always give you the most terrible things on television, people with terrible illnesses, and they'll complain, and some will be advocating and so on. And it's put across in such an emotive way, folk will, oh well, I guess it's the best thing to do. So when it's your turn or someone else's turn, well, I guess that's the way we're constantly trained into how to respond to every situation today. We're trained way in advance, way in advance of anything. And people really have no idea of the vastness of the organizations and layers of them above you that run your life. You really don't have a clue. And you're not really meant to have a clue. You're meant to think it's just the politicians. You really are, isn't it? Isn't that astonishing? We vote people. Do you really think that folk get voted in who to run? You think they're running a country, and they never run a thing in their life. Look at Obama, for instance. He was a good example. He's picked up for his social activism, supposedly. Not there was much of that either. But he hadn't even done a McDonald's hamburger joint. He hadn't. Do you really think he ran the country? Do you think that? Do you really believe that? Or Theresa May, for that matter, over in Britain? See, the art of politics is to play games. That's all it is, and to evade. It's like running a course and trying to not get knocked over by things coming your way, and trying to dodge them and get around them and knock other ones over. It's all personal stuff, really, isn't it? That's not running. But what did they know of running massive organisations that run over us. Nothing. And that's what Julian Huxley talks about, creating these organisations, these private organisations, which would be very secretive and rule us. However, today we're getting trained to go along with all the other associations that fancy or very official sounding names. They're really private organisations. Eventually they start getting your government funding as well, when the people start to accept it as being part of the government. It's an old technique and it works awfully well. But, you know, if you look at this article here, education starts in kindergarten. The United Nations radical agenda pushes sex, etc. in kindergarten. They published a new comprehensive, so-called comprehensive sex ed guidelines for schools, taking its cues from Planned Parenthood to help teachers instruct kindergartners on LGBTQIA and ideology and practice, it says. Remember, Planned Parenthood is a eugenics program, remember, to get rid of the weeds, as founder Margaret Sanger said. Read it up in their own books, by the way. I'm not making it up. And the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, remember, Julian Huxley again, revised it and renamed its 2009 Comprehensive Sexuality Education, CSE document, pushing contraceptive-based sex ed in what the New American calls a full-blown assault on parental rights and traditional morality that could devastate a generation of young people. And people don't really see it as a war against a particular targeted group. But it is. To achieve a much, much bigger objective, and depopulation, of course, too, down the road, as we start dying off by not having children, etc. And the best way to do it is to hypersexualize everyone. As I say, they won't have a partner. They'll think nothing of abortion if they get pregnant for the girls. And it's promoted anyway, isn't it? And the state takes care of it, and the state in most countries pays for it. It all works along the right path because no one will actually want to have and raise children, except the elite themselves. It says here, despite objections of various member states, the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education takes UN abortion promotion a step further, indoctrinating children in pro-abortion, pro-homosexuality, pro-transgenderism and pro-fornication propaganda starting at age 5. And the critics said these standards sexualise kindergarten children and advocate masturbation, abortion, gender confusion, homosexuality, homosexual parenting, contraception and premarital sex. And that, again, is what they said many, many years ago. Everything they could promote, they don't care what it is, as long as they don't have children, if possible. And it actually works, of course, very, very well. Very emotive for most folk. Because they generally have sides. They jump on sides. But you just stand apart from all of it, and see the bigger picture. Who's pushing it? Not the ones they mentioned here, but the ones way above all. UNESCO is sure, but UNESCO's got its agenda for the United Nations. And you don't forget who also set up the Department of Population in the United Nations. Again, that was the Rockefeller Foundation who set that up. And they don't call it Department of Population Control anymore. They dropped the control bit, but it's the same organisation. It works with UNESCO, etc., etc., etc. Everything is all connected. Truly is. But the folk don't know, and no wonder they don't know. No one tells them, right? And we accept so much. You're born into a particular time, and you accept it without thinking much about it. And what shocks people from generation to generation is how easily it was targeted at the time, how they accept the norms that were promoted in school, how different it is from the parents' point of view. Anything can be taught to be normal if it's done in the proper way. That's why they have psychologists and behaviourists working on the curriculums of school. We must remember that anybody who was anybody in the early 20th century, belonged to the Eugenics Society, based in London. H.G. Wells belonged to it. Julian Huxley, as I say, was a member too, naturally. And many other people, and the Darwins, all the Darwin lineage, and the Galtons too. They're all intermarried, by the way, the Darwins, the Galtons, and the Huxleys. With the Wedgwoods, because all the Darwins, for a couple of generations, maybe more of them actually, only interbred with the Wedgwood family. In fact, I think when Charles Darwin's wife died, she was a Wedgwood. He then married his aunt, who was a Wedgwood. And that's what they did. They were trying to do is literally what they call proper breeding for intelligence and genius. That hasn't gone out of fashion, by the way, because now it's done through genetic engineering and manipulation of various genes and epigenetics, etc. That's all part of modern eugenics. And there's an article here about the Galton collection on eugenics. And it's called Racism, Eugenics, and the Domestication of Humans. Because if you think it was all about animals, when they're experimenting on animals and so on, it's still doing too with animals too, but rats or mice, let's compare them to humans. Can we train them to do this? Train them? That's all we do. Can they, if you understand how you can train all kinds of animals, what they have in common, then the idea is ultimately you can train and control all humans too, the same way. And this article here is by Subhadra Das, and it says the Grant Museum's current exhibition, called the Museum of Ordinary Animals, the boring beast that changed the world, explores the mundane creatures in our everyday lives. Here in the blog, we will be delving into some of the stories featured in the exhibition with the UCL researchers who helped put it together. December 1863, the scientist Francis Galton presented a paper to the Ethnological Society entitled The Domestication of Animals. The Ethnological Society, remember, for ethnic groups and the people. The Domestication of Animals. In it, he outlined 6 characteristics necessary for an animal to be domesticated. Now, this is awfully, awfully important, because it's human traits that then can be exploited. Just like everyone's got their problems on the internet, everyone's into their favourite particular social media, etc., and their Facebooks, etc., 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 right? So the first one was hardiness, the ability to survive despite human neglect. So hardiness is one. So in other words, cheap to keep alive, basically, or even cost negligible. 2, fondness for man, notwithstanding occasional hard usage and frequent neglects. Okay? Now, fondness for man, we're all social creatures, you see. We act as big groups. It's easy to manage us for that reason. Appeal to the group. And as I said here, notwithstanding occasional hard usage and frequent neglects. So they can use you for all kinds of nasty, hard, soul-destroying and physically destroying projects in the past. Big wars and all that. And then frequent neglect, where the authorities that are ruling you and supposed to be your kind of father figures. That's how it used to always be. Still, in some countries, it's still played up, yeah. Can neglect you once they've used you. And you'll still like them all. Desire of comfort, number 3. A motive which strongly attached certain animals to human habitation. There you go. Desire of comfort. 4, usefulness to man. Awfully important. Words are awfully important. Man, okay. Usefulness to man. Number 5, breeding freely. So when they need you to breed not for numbers like they always did for big wars or expansion of enterprise and colonialism, breeding freely. Number 6, in other words, you don't have to stand and watch them or mix them. Number 6, easy to tend. but which large numbers of them can be controlled by a few herdsmen. A very important one. Easy to tend, but which large numbers of them can be controlled by a few herdsmen. These are the gatekeepers, of course, to give you what your memes are, what your temporary or at the moment obsession is going to be, that you're going to be angry about, or you're pro or against, or whatever it happens to be. You see? Big agendas. And also gregariousness is such a quality where you can all meet together and you judge how you are by bouncing ideas off your peer group, basically. It's worth noting that this paper was presented not to an audience of scientists who study animal behavior, but to ethnologists, that is, scientists who study the difference between different groups of people. That is, scientists who study the difference between different groups of people. And that Galton's main objective in outlining these traits was to demonstrate that domestication happened because certain species of animals were, by their inherent nature, domesticable. They're talking about humans here. And it says where a particular species does not have the traits to be brought under human control, he said. Less civilized human societies, such as the reindeer herders of Lapland, are forced to live their lives to accommodate the animals in order to benefit from them. Galton gives examples from all over the world of how what he called the rude races had successfully brought animals under their control as pets, sacred animals, and in zoos. In other words, it's easy to domesticate animals. Even savages can do it. And it says, we all know that museum catalogues lie. And it says that it's very clear that it's a firm advocate writer here for the agency of museum practitioners. No element of museum practice happens magically by itself in a vacuum. It's enacted by those of us privileged to work with collections. And it says the week's guest blogger is called Ananda Rutherford and explores the questions through the looking glass of the Galton Collection online catalogue. One of the most controversial collections at UCL is, of course, the Galton Collection. And Francis Galton, with his notorious interest in improving humans by selective breeding or eugenics, the term he coined, is a problematic figure, and preserving a collection of artifacts associated with him for posterity within the context of the modern university is troubling. Every element of the way in which he and his collection are presented requires careful consideration. And this article goes on about what they're really up to and creating order. That was the guise they went under. They're talking about an order of society run by professionals. By understanding how we tick, psychology, human dynamics, and again, very important, as part of it too in the early days, introduction of mandatory compulsive schooling for children, because that's where indoctrination starts. And other philosophers like Jack C. Lull said the same thing, that if you don't get that early indoctrination, when you're very impressionable, and you're not wise in the worlds, or the wise in the, I call it conology, because everything's run by conning us all, conology. If you don't get that early indoctrination, and you grow up a little bit, and you get it when you're older, you'll question what you've been taught. You can part it off, but you might not believe it. So the early indoctrination for the impressionable children is important, or the later indoctrination through college, etc., will not take, because you're thinking for yourself. Very important. There's nothing they don't know about the techniques and how they work. It's astonishing. It got me too. H.G. Wells, remember, is a member of the Eugenics Society. He knew all these different people. As I say, anybody who was anybody, all the socialists were, all the Fabian Society members too, for the supposed workers, etc., were eugenicists, if you didn't know that. Bernard Shaw was quite blatant about it. And H.G. Wells, and all the rest of them. Even, I think, Besant was a member of it too, old Annie. But then her daddy was a lord as well. So they ran the right wing and they ran the left wing. The whole idea was to give you parties. And the parties would sell the right things for the followers, and you'd vote. And that way you wouldn't have revolutions, because you always vote the other ones out. Then you get sick of the next bunch after 4 or 5 years, and you vote them out, and then the other ones are back again, you see. So that's the con of it all. And in reality, as I said tonight, the real rulers are professionally trained, and they have levels and levels and levels of them, multi-specialists, or specialist areas, I should say, of ruling us all. That's how it was done. And Julian Huxley was part of it too. That's how the world is run. So you can vote all you want. Is it going to change? People can't really figure it out, even today. When things are weird, they can't figure it out. So I was looking at one of, I think it was Peter Hitchens' blog in the paper, and he was talking about the white helmets being brought in under agreement, international agreement. France and Canada and Britain going to accept them. And he said these people were radicalized members of the Al-Qaeda. So you can't figure out why you're bringing them in. That's what he was saying. Why are they bringing them? What's ruling us has a different agenda. And the future is to be like those dystopian movies that started churning out in at least the late 80s and all through the 90s, where you saw rubble everywhere, a lot of poverty. They call it austerity. That's where they want to take you. That's the term they use. It doesn't sound as bad as poverty. And the United Nations said that we must be a post-consumerist society. So you'd be into this system of poverty with all kinds of groups, supposedly radicalized groups, fighting each other at the very bottom. And the mandatory black gooned-clad military guys going through the rubble, they're shooting everybody else that is out of line. That's what they see. It's amazing how many futurists work writing these stories that are put into movies. And the futurists, some of the top ones, all work with these big foundations that bring in the future. And getting back to the members of the Eugenics Society, and I'll put up their modern name now because they change it a bit. It's still, they're still looking for the Galton Institute. They're still looking for helping people through gene tampering, for medical reasons and so on, to make you feel better, help the children, all that stuff. It's the same organization with the same goals, and it simply changed its name. That's all. And the people don't know, but anyway, H.G. Wells talked about quite openly and blatantly too. And Wells also said they would push free love. In the late 1800s, he was a part of a group promoting that because they said they'd have to destroy the family unit, stop male and female bonding, because if they bonded, they could have children and actually be successful in raising them by keeping them alive. And they belonged to the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society was set up as a front. They fooled the working people. We're here to help you. Poor workers, Quite something. And of course the Webbs were also members of the Eugenics Society too. For the betterment through selective breeding and negative eugenics and positive eugenics. Positive eugenics was to encourage the breeding of children of the superior ones, and negative eugenics was to abort and sterilize the children of the feeble-minded, or those who are just below par, as they say. And don't forget, for those who think they're above par, Julian Huxley said the same thing. Many will help us come to power, he said, and expect the benefits, but they too will be included in those who will be discarded. That was the terminology he used. They've got prizes given out too at the Galton Institute, for instance. You saw the smiling faces of young students in their white coats and all that, who are looking down microscopes, and they're going to be responsible for bettering the people by altering genes here and there, all for your own good. Quite good, isn't it? Doesn't it sound exciting and proactive and optimistic, etc., etc.? Isn't that wonderful? And the Galton Institute, they tell you what Therefore, in their own words, of course, sounds wonderful, really. Nice pictures of happy people. And it's a learned society concerned with the scientific study of all aspects of human heredity. These include molecular genetics, genetic medicine, genetic epidemiology, population genetics and population dynamics, demographics, human evolution, elements of psychology, and the statistical analysis of inherited traits. It's the same old institution of the Eugenics Society. That's what it is. And don't forget that all doctors today are pretty complicit in a lot of it because their training leads them along a path. Remember, by the way you train someone and teach them with professional advice and experts, you can bring anyone to the conclusion that you want on everything. And medicine for years has been training people who study it that the only way to ultimately end all these diseases and so on, apart from elimination of causative factors from outside sources, is the inside sources, the genes themselves, defective genes, like the movie Gattaca, you see, epigenetics, etc., and tampering with and replacing genes with, superior ones for those that are a bit retarded, as they say. Mm-hmm. Nothing changes, Nothing changes. And for the elite themselves, they have no problem with the elite of other countries. All this stuff about purely racial aspects, you should start to wonder about it, rather than just blame this group or that group or whatever. Some groups certainly do. Very few think they're superior, and are rather blatant about it too. But in reality, if you look at the other eugenicists as well, like Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, who's long dead now, 2001 and 2010, Space Odyssey, etc. But he also did 3001 as well, for those who don't know, where he was into this kind of fantasy world of the superior gene types who outlived everybody else for reasons that he doesn't actually go into so much. But they were the ones who are the mixers. They're all mixed races of superior, the elite groups. He says the features in all the people had traits of different races, but they had been the interbreeding of the elite groups, of elite people in all races. He doesn't mention, in other words, that the ones who were inferior just simply died off or something. Very much like H.G. Wells, A Modern Utopia. A bit more blatant in a sense. And that's what he had in 3001. So don't start fighting other peoples, because this is very cleverly done, We're ruled by emotions, and we're given the camps to jump into. And as you really look at the media today and don't understand the whys, you will jump into them. They're meant to get you into them. Like I say, Peter Hitchens can't fathom what they're up to here. It's a bigger agenda. It's all planned, as I say, at the start of this talk, planned long before with the gaming industry of warfare, of if we ever had to, blah, 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 go into these countries for the oil and their resources, what would the blowback be? Can we use a blowback for our bigger agenda, the destruction of nations, to get a world government, etc., etc.? And how do we rule people as we're going through destruction of nations? Well, you set different ethnic groups against each other as you're doing it internally. Then you've got the reason to control the populations under the guise of terrorism. Done long, long before Gulf War I. That's how well everything is planned. Right down to the massive weather control and all the weather warfare projects openly declassified today, some of them. And the ongoing ones from big participants in Harvard and elsewhere. Nothing secretive about it. It's just they don't keep talking about it. It's been spraying the sky steadily since 1998, and with all the forest fires on the go everywhere. Still here in Canada. Got it in Greece, of course, but that was man-made too. And again, you have about some terrorist aspects in some countries too they're questioning as well with the fires, because some were advocating it.